What does it really mean to teach with a student-centered mindset? In this episode, Alisa shares insights from her dissertation research, diving into the power of the assemblage, the role of self-reflection, and why embracing experimentation is key to meaningful teaching and learning.
Welcome to Pass the Baton, Empowering Students in Music Education. Here, we amplify the voices of music teachers around the world who are passing the baton and creating environments where the music students are empowered. Together, we can help students transform from passive consumers to vibrant creatives. Welcome back to the Pass the Baton podcast. I'm Kathryn Finch.
And I'm Theresa Hoover. We are so glad everyone is joining us today. Well,
Yeah.
Kathryn, the school year is starting to wind down. How are you feeling these days?
Tired and good, doing well. Excited kind of for just to relax a little bit this summer and, I don't know,
Yeah.
take a breath. But
Yes, I can totally understand that. Well, I think today's guest was a really good one to have. I met Alisa before I even got to ASU, but I've had the opportunity to just kind of follow her work over the past couple of years. And I know sometimes we talk about research, think, oh, like research really, it's too disconnected from the classroom, but that was not the case with what Alisa was doing. And I think she did such a great job of talking about how her research can be meaningful for teachers. What did you
yeah.
think?
Yeah, no, I thought it was great. I mean, it just was relatable. And she talks about some band activities that I could like see immediately doing in my room or in another kind of ensemble. So it was something that everybody can take a little piece with them.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought she did a great job of just talking about, how we think about who's in the classroom and how we move forward. And a lot of it was built by the fact that, she was in the classroom doing the things as she as part of her research project. So I think it was just really, really good connection. I know everyone's going to love it. One of the things Alisa talked about a lot was creativity and how she wanted to incorporate more of that. And she provided some really great ideas. So make sure you especially stay tuned till the end because she gives a very specific idea for a creativity activity that you could do right there in your classroom. So don't, make sure you get to the
Yeah.
end just for that purpose. If you need more creative activities for your classroom, you may have seen we just launched the post-concert creativity challenge. Basically, just 4 weeks worth of emails. Each week, you'll get a different idea of something you can do in the classroom to kind of spark creativity. Whether your concerts are over and you have some extra time, or you're just looking for something a little bit different to do. So it's not too late to sign up for that. We'll put the link in the show notes so that you could just click sign up and get access to those activities. And we'll send you, if we're already a little ways in, you'll get the previous ones as well. So don't worry.
Yeah. Yeah. And you don't have to do all of them, right? If you're getting close like I am, maybe you'll just find one thing you can do with that one group and then save them for next year.
Absolutely. Yeah. That they're all downloadable. You just save it, put it in your teacher files and you'll be ready to go. So before we get to today's interview, we want to remind you that you can support Pass the Baton and get awesome perks.
Join the coffee club for as little as $2 a month and unlock discounts, free resources, planning parties, and more. Check out the link in the show notes to learn more.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. We are excited to be joined today by another one of my ASU classmates, Alisa Hanson. Welcome, Alisa.
Thanks so much for having me.
Of course, we're glad you're here. It's been fun following your journey over the last couple of years, and I know that you have a lot of great things that our listeners are going to be excited to hear about.
Thanks.
Could you start with introducing yourself a little bit and telling us about your background and current role in music education?
Sure. So I was a band kid. My parents forced me to take piano lessons as a kid, which I hated, but I started playing clarinet in fifth grade, did marching band in high school, took up the bassoon in high school. And when it came to college, I decided to major in music education and bassoon performance. So I did the double major thing. And in college, really fell in love with working with junior high students. So when I graduated, I moved back to Phoenix and got a position teaching mostly fifth or eighth grade band at two schools. I did strings for a couple years. I had jazz bands at both schools, and I did that for about 7 years. And then I was a full-time grad student at ASU, did my master's and started PhD work. and worked with student teachers and a lot of the undergraduate classes as a TA. And then in fall of 22, I went back into the classroom, same district I had worked in before, but full time at one school, which was really nice. I didn't have to be a traveling teacher anymore. And it was the fine arts magnet for our district, which was also exciting. There was a lot more art support. And I taught mostly fifth or eighth grade band. I also did, this year we started a fourth grade pre-band class using the Nouveau instruments, kind of an experiment
Fun.
for our district. And then I also got to create and teach a new course for all the seventh and eighth graders. And we called them Pathways courses. So each fine arts teacher taught a different Pathways course. And mine was, I called it Pop Music Lab. It ended up being more of a introductory rock band class. So students learned basics of guitar, keyboard, bass, drum set. We had some cajones. Our choir teacher did sound trap, digital music sound trap. So all the seventh and eighth graders spent about 3 or 4 weeks with us and then rotated on to the next class. And they got us once in the fall and once in the spring. And so I taught there through December, and then my spouse got a new job. So I actually just moved to Washington State and
Nice.
used my unemployed status to finish my dissertation. And that was good. And now I'm working on getting my Washington teaching license so I can find a gig here.
That's awesome. Well, first of all, congratulations on finishing the dissertation because that's
Thank
huge.
you. Yes, it was a lot of
Yeah.
work.
Yeah. But that's, essentially what we're here to talk about today because I found your dissertation work was really, really fascinating and super applicable to teachers, which
Thanks.
we always hope it will be, but yours really, really got there. So tell us first, what was the name of what was the title of your study? Do you remember?
What did it end up being?
I know you changed it a couple times.
Becoming music teacher, a quilted artographic inquiry.
Yes.
Lots of
Awesome.
big words.
Lots of big words, right? But what would you say? Like, what's the gist of it?
So I wanted to be more student-centered, more focused on creativity and make better connections between in school and out of school music making with my students. And to do that, I was teaching and I was engaging in art making as a way of reflecting on my teaching and trying to integrate that more in my classroom.
Cool. All right. Well, let's start with the student-centered thing. How do you define that word, or what does that mean to you? And why did you choose to go that like make that the focus of your work?
I think there's two aspects of student-centeredness that I kind of focused on as a result of what I saw in my early teaching. So the first aspect of that is just this disconnect between school music making and out of school music making. I might start on a good year 100 fifth graders between my two schools, and then maybe like absolute best year, 20 of them might do high school band in some capacity, and maybe three of them do band in college or outside of that. And band was really great for my students in school, but it was very much an in-school way of being musical. And I didn't think that I was setting them up to be lifelong music makers. Especially, if you play tuba, there's probably a community band out there, but you got to find a tuba. And I didn't feel like I was setting up my students to be musicians after school. So there's that aspect of student-centeredness of trying to connect what's happening in schools with what students are interested in and what they can do long term. And then the other side of student centeredness is people be like, oh, that's so great. You're a band teacher. Students really need a creative outlet. And I'm thinking, fifth grade band is not creative. It's all about like how to put your instrument together and read notation and embouchure and stuff. And so I wanted to see how students could be making those musical decisions and be creative and make band an art form instead of just a technique class. So those are things I thought about and worked through as a grad student. And then when I went back into the classroom, it was really trying to make the effort to actually do that in my classes.
Yeah. So I'm ready to find out. So what kind of changes and shifts, what does that look like in the classroom or in yours when you were trying things out?
So it looks so different from grade level to grade level and band versus my pathways class. So I found the most success with my fifth graders, and I think it's because fifth graders don't know what band is. They're still at that age where they're super excited about everything. They'll try anything. And the year I did my dissertation research, I had a really great group of fifth graders that just got along really well and were enthusiastic about everything. So we did a lot of different things. It was little activities like, you know, we did a little improv circle when they first learned how to do how to put their instruments together. So they only knew how to make maybe one note on their instrument, but we sat in a circle and made a little improv groove with that. They did some composition projects with rhythms. So they had, this was something I got from Dr. Schmidt at ASU. So they wrote their name using the rhythms they knew. So like Lisa, quarter, eighth, eighth, or whatever they wanted. They had them written out, and then I had them get in groups, and I said, okay, figure out how you're going to perform your names together.
Mhm.
And they were so creative, and they added dance moves, and um, some of them learned each other's rhythms and performed them all. Some of them had like a three-part situation where they layered their rhythms together. So those were little activities we did. And then kind of organically, this requests day thing came about. And my fifth graders really liked sharing what they had been working on with their classmates. So, like playing solos, if we learned a line from the method book, everyone wanted to play it as a solo for the class.
Mm.
And so I found that we were doing that a lot. And there were two things with that. One, we weren't always learning new stuff because we wanted to use a lot of class time to share their work. And two, there was always a few students who didn't feel comfortable sharing playing with the
Mm.
class. So I said, okay, we have a 6 day rotation. Every day six is going to be our request day where you guys get to lead what we're doing. So they would create the rhythm for our warm up. They would lead mouthpiece echoes and lip slurs. And then they could play something they'd been working on by themselves or with their friends, or a lot of them started creating their own music and sharing it with the class. And again, this was just totally them on their own that they did this. And a lot of them ended up performing those compositions at our December concert,
Mm.
which was very brave of them.
Mhm.
Um, and I got to see a side of students that I hadn't seen, that I wouldn't see just playing the method book. Like I had one little guy, we'll call him Max, um, always needed some reminders about, okay, Max, it's time to set up your bell kit. Or we're working, we spent 10 minutes in the book and I'll walk by and he doesn't have his book out. Max, you gotta get your book out. Here's where we're at. Um, but he took the beginning of hot cross buns and he played the first three notes of hot cross buns on his bell kit and then he inverted it an octave higher. And he continued with this little variation. He'd play little bits of pieces we had learned in class and then do little variations on them. And the cool thing about Max was like a lot of the kids kind of had an improvisatory approach. There were some similarities with their compositions from week to week that they were sharing, but Max's was very consistent from week to week and he'd add on to it, but he remembered it all and was able to perform that for our concert, which was a side of Max
Mhm.
I definitely would not have seen if we had only been doing method book work.
Mhm.
It's really neat. So do you feel like these little things have helped address, I mean, we're talking about fifth graders, so we don't know where they're going to go beyond, high school, college, but do you feel like it helped connect that music making outside of the classroom?
Yeah, again, we don't know, but I think,
Yeah.
they can pick up a guitar or a keyboard. Those are things that most people or more people have access to than band
Hmm.
instrument in the future. And I think they have some tools where they can experiment and try things out and listen to things they like and try to figure it out on their instruments, which is what I was letting them do in class. So that's a different skill set they have that they can apply to another instrument in the future if they want.
Hmm.
Um, yeah.
That's important. Yeah, because I feel like sometimes when we just focus on the method book and the concert and, those very distinct things that we're not giving students the opportunity to see what else there is. We think,
Mhm.
oh, they can do it on their own, but they've never even get the encouragement with us there. I don't think they will figure it out on their own, at least not as many of them.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Another cool thing I think is when they share, it's like I learned from Max, like, oh, I
Mhm.
didn't think I could, I didn't, as composer, I didn't realize I could invert something or go up an octave or, so by sharing, they kind of maybe push each other for like different ideas and ways to create
Mhm.
in the next 6 days. That's cool.
Exactly. And I think a lot of that also just encouraged each other, like, oh, Max did that cool thing. I bet I can come up with something cool.
Hmm.
Just to
Hmm.
be brave and try something,
Hmm.
which was very awesome.
Yeah. And I can see what you're describing happening in other classrooms, like a general music class or a high school choir class, like because you're just
Hmm.
providing, you're almost like taking away the structure to a point, right? So that it doesn't have to be, it's going to look, band is not going to look like this box all the time, right?
Hmm.
We can open that up. And I think that's something
Hmm.
that doesn't just have to be reserved for fifth grade band. Would you agree?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
And going back to like my other classes, because that was
Mm-hmm.
like the fifth grade band way of doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Junior high was a little different because I was a newer teacher to them. They had started with a different person, and band was last hour. And I was like, okay, I finished all my classes. Now I have a fun class at the end of the day. I just want to play my instrument. And it was harder for me to change things up with them. But we focused on reflecting on our own playing and the playing of our peers to kind of lead rehearsals. And they definitely pushed back a little bit on that because they're like, I don't want to think, I just want to play fun songs. But we tried, and I think that helped them, be a little more reflective and aware of their performing. And then in the Pathways class, that was really exciting for me because it was something I was just, I got to make the class whatever I wanted it to be. And it was just a thing that all the junior high kids got to do, and there wasn't any pressure or expectation of what it needed to be. And so, the district had guitars and keyboards, and I was able to get like an electric bass and an electric drum set and some other things, which was really cool. And we would learn things together, like we'd learn how to read tab notation, we'd learn chords together, we'd practice them. But then I set up kind of a stations situation in my room so students could choose if they want to focus on piano, here's the resources for the piano stuff. If they wanted to focus on guitar, here's the resources for that, and you can choose what songs you want to learn. We had a rotation for students who wanted to spend time on the electric drum set with their headphones or one of the two basses. Um, so I did have curated materials for them, and they only had the instruments that I had access to, but they got to choose which one they wanted to focus on. They could choose what songs they wanted to learn on those different instruments. We also did a lot of group projects. So they did a cover song project, and then they did like an original composition project, and they got to work with their friends. I let them pick their groups mostly, gave them a few. It has to be a minute long. It has to use the chords we know. You have to pick a mood for it, but um, you get to explore and figure out what you want to do with that.
That's cool. And you said that the students were only in those classes for a couple of weeks.
Yeah,
Is
I
that
think we had about 15 to 18 class periods with each
okay?
group, which is
And
not
in
a
that,
ton of time. Yeah.
no. And in that time, they were able to put together a song, more or
Mhm.
less. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
See, it can be done.
Yes, it can.
That's really cool. Um, you said something a moment ago that kind of brings me to like what one of our next questions was going to be. You mentioned how your other classes, your other band classes were different than your fifth grade class, right? So
Hmm.
you weren't able to just go in and automatically start doing the same things. And we know that that's because they're different kids, right?
Hmm.
One of the things that you talked about a lot in your dissertation was this idea of an assemblage, right? And that's probably not a word that we use very often in music education. You see it a lot in research, but not in music education. But the way you explained it when I, have talked to you, it's very, very relevant. So can you kind of dive into that idea a little bit?
Sure. So just like a really quick introduction of an assemblage. Like a classroom is an assemblage, is a group of things that are in relationship to each other. I, as a teacher, I'm an assemblage of all my past musical experiences, things I want to do, goals, my insecurities, all of that makes who I am. And in a classroom, it's, the students you have, the teacher, the resources you have access to, the perspectives and expectations that your students bring to the classroom. And the important thing in an assemblage isn't those individual parts, but the relationships between them. So my goals for students, while that's important, it really doesn't have meaning until it's in relationship to the students who are in my classroom and the space that we're learning in and what's going on in the wider, school assemblage. Um, and I think this idea of an assemblage helps me because in my early teaching, I would replicate fifth grade band from year to year, school to school. I had a little spreadsheet. I had each week of the school year, and I had the lines of the method book that we would do. And I would try to do that every year. And I try to keep both my schools on the same track. And I just try to be better at that each year, get farther in the method book. And I repeated that every year for 7 years at 3 different schools. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think my students learned a lot. They could play their instruments well, but it doesn't acknowledge the specific students that you have in front of you in the specific teaching context that you're in with whatever might be happening that year at your school. Um, so I think thinking in terms of an assemblage just really highlights that complexity of teaching and the specific context that you're working in. And it opens up possibilities to do things in that might be different because it's a different group of students who have different needs, different desires, are good at different things. And, my district has a guaranteed curriculum for fifth grade band that everyone, this is what you're guaranteed to learn in fifth grade band. We also have like pacing guides and unit plans, and we even have a district standardized assessment for fifth graders. And so it's really easy for the 33 or 34 elementary schools in my district for fifth grade band to look very much the same from school to school. And again, that's not necessarily inherently a bad thing. I just think there is opportunity to make band more responsive to your specific students in your specific school.
Yeah.
You're
I just
nodding,
I
Kathryn, like
Yeah, I mean, I just right there's going to be groups that the pacing is different, and there's going to be time for reteaching with one class, and but not necessarily with another. And yeah, I could see that you definitely everybody's going to be different and how they like to process that information. Like in my world, I'm thinking general music, and so there's certain instruments that kids gravitate to or we haven't done for a while and like to switch it up. So yeah, it does really matter who's in front of you.
Exactly. And my first year back in the classroom, my fifth graders were a tougher group, like one of the tougher groups I've had because they had so much instability in their homeroom classes. They had multiple teachers throughout the year. They had months without a teacher and multiple subs. And so the focus of our time together was like being together in community and being safe and kind to each other. The next year had different situation, much more stable homeroom situation. And so those students got along better and we were able to engage in music making in different ways because they were a completely different group of kiddos.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and it's so easy to fall into the trap of like, no, this is where we should be. This is what we should be doing. This is what, the book says this comes next. But the fact that we were putting, the teacher, the kids, the school community, what's going on in the world, what's like all of those things are going to impact. So did you find that you were able to still more or less keep to the guaranteed curriculum, was that the word, while acknowledging these assemblages and the differences between the different classes that you had?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's just how you go about working on them. So, for example, that rhythm activity I mentioned with fifth graders working on quarter, half, eighth notes with their names, old Alisa would have just practiced lines in the method book with those or rhythms on the board with those, whereas new Alisa is doing composition activities and improvisation activities around those. So they're still learning it. They're just doing it in a different way that's not maybe traditional large ensemble practices.
Right. That makes so much sense. So you're looking for all of the different ways that you can incorporate those things, but that's going to best meet the needs of the kids in front of you.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was a teacher I worked with years and years and years ago, and I think I was general music and band in that particular school, but I was always very concerned about like the schedule, especially if there was a 2 hour delay or something like that. Like, but what's the schedule? What's the schedule? Who am I gonna, when am I? He's like, just take a deep breath and teach whoever walks in the room. Whoever walks in the room, that's who you teach. And it's like, right, right. Whoever walks in the room, but it's that idea that like we don't have to have every single thing exactly the same as it's been before because whoever walks in our
Mm-hmm.
room, that's what we're focused on and that's who we're
Mm-hmm.
focused on.
Yeah. And then if you leave space for those things to happen and to try new things and experiment a little bit, then you get to see cool things like Max's improvisation on Mary Had a Little Lamb, which I never would have seen in a traditional band setting. So
Yeah. Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah. And some of it, I think you said it was like experiment, like giving them this sixth day kind of, what did you call it? Um,
Request day.
yeah, request day. Um, but I'm guessing too, it's a lot about relationship building and just because it's you kind of talked about, well, this group is kind of like this. So kind of really getting to know your kids to be able to then know where they're at, right? And what they like, what they prefer over other past years and things like that. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And that was an advantage of being full-time at one school, which I had not had in the past. And it makes such a huge difference. Like I didn't know what I was missing out on being a traveling teacher until I was at one school. And it's so much easier to get connected with students and families. And I can, oh, at lunch, I can run over and talk to the PE teacher about the kid,
Yeah.
or I can talk to their social studies teacher, and that helps so much. So,
Yeah. Well, I know you had mentioned earlier with your, I think, seventh and eighth graders, self-reflection, and I think that was also in your dissertation. Are there maybe other examples of how you've included self-reflection with any of your other groups or um,
that was something actually I got started in before graduate school because I think we had had a lot of professional development on the web's depth of knowledge circle with the four domains. And domain one is like recall, label, and domain four is like create, synthesize, reflect. That might be domain three. But they really wanted us getting working in those domains three and four with our students. And so I was like, okay, I'm up here telling students what to do. How can I better engage them in listening and reflecting? And so that was the easy things like thumbs up, thumbs down. Okay, how was your piano on that thing? You know, or let's split the group in half. You're gonna, this side of the room is gonna play, this side's gonna tell them two things they were awesome at. Then let's flip it and you're gonna tell them one thing that they can do better, improve on. And that was an easy thing to add to a normal band rehearsal, that got students really thinking and reflecting and listening better. That was a really easy, simple thing to add in.
Yeah, and it's so important for them to be able to listen and hear those things, right?
Hmm.
Because that's all just bringing them towards that independent musician idea. If they can listen to something and really hear what's happening, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then with my pathways class, I tried having them grade themselves on their projects. So I asked them specific questions. They had a little rubric they could fill out, did they meet the three criteria or whatever? And then I asked them, okay, what did you do musically? What decisions did you make your piece sound like the mood that you chose from our mood wheel? Um, and then they had to grade themselves and explain why. And I didn't know how that would go with middle schoolers, but surprisingly, it went really, really well. They were pretty accurate. There's, one or two who would just be like, oh, yeah, I got 100%, but not as many as I thought. And
Good.
the issue I had was kids actually grading themselves lower than I thought they deserved. And I had to be like, no, but remember that one thing that you did and you changed that setting on the piano and it did this thing? And they're like, oh, yeah. So that was a really cool experiment because I didn't know how it would work with junior high kids, but it worked very well.
Okay. That's encouraging. That's good. And I love to hear you say how it's an experiment.
Yeah,
It's just like
try
we're
it.
gonna let right. And that's such a key to all of this. So in addition to your students reflecting, I know you spent a lot of time self-reflecting as well. And that was a big part of of that your final project. So what did you gain through that? Is it worthwhile for teachers to reflect?
Well, I think
Leading
it's,
question.
yeah, of course it is. I mean, teachers are really great at reflecting all the time. We're great at that monitor and adjust thing. But I think the thing that we run into, teaching is so busy and hectic. And you have a second, without students, and it's like, oh, I got to turn that form in and call that parent. And oh, the social studies teacher went home sick. I got to cover her class on my prep.
Mhm.
And you get in that hamster wheel of just getting, you know, surviving. And it's hard to find that time to really reflect. And so in my dissertation work, I decided to engage in creating art as a way of reflecting because I'm trying to do something different. So I was like, maybe I should try to reflect in a new way. Maybe that'll help me come up with cool ideas for my teaching. So I chose to engage in quilting as a way of reflecting on my teaching. And Dr. Stoffer, one of our awesome professors at ASU, pointed out that that's a great way of slowing down to spend the time you need to reflect more deeply on your teaching and on music learning. And I think that was a really important thing because if I take the time to sit down and pull fabrics and threads and start piecing things together, it forces me to slow down and think more deeply about what I'm doing with my students and how my students are engaging with music learning.
That's really
And
neat.
so,
Yeah.
yeah, so I made a whole quilt about my teaching, but you know, playing our instruments or journaling or drawing, any way you want to engage with art. But if you can do that in a way where you're also thinking about your teaching, representing it, thinking about possibilities, you can apply that then to your teaching too, which is great.
Yeah. I think you're so right about the fact that, one class ends and I've got 3 minutes before the next class gets here. And there's not an opportunity to really sit down and reflect. But that's good that you were able to create the space for that.
Yeah, I definitely had to be intentional about it, and I didn't do it as much as I wanted to. But, having that reminder of like, oh, I need to sit down with my supplies for a little bit and think through things really made a difference. So it's just being intentional with that reflection, whatever your reflection looks like, but being more intentional about finding uninterrupted time, even if it's 15 minutes, a
Mhm.
week, do something. I think that's really helpful.
So when we were writing Pass the Baton, one of the things that we were intentional about was the end of each chapter, we put a little section that said things you can try tomorrow. And we found that teachers really liked that because it was something quick and actionable and, something they could actually do. So while I know they've gotten a lot of really great ideas from you today, if you had one suggestion of something a teacher could try tomorrow, what would you recommend?
Okay, I'm going to give you two things, one broad and
Perfect.
one specific activity. The broad thing is experiment. Like, take some time and try something because you guys have so many ideas on your podcast. There might be something listeners have been like, oh, I've been wanting to try that, but I haven't. Like, just try it. Take a day. Worst case scenario, it crashes and burns. You never do it again. Um, but like this time of year is really great, especially if you're an ensemble teacher, because your concerts are probably over, but you have that weird time at the end of the school year where like half your kids are gone for field day and like things are wonky. And so like that's a great time to experiment.
Yeah.
And then the specific thing is an activity I did with my fifth graders that I think could work really well for any grade level. So for them, I gave them a little half sheet that had the pentatonic scale without the octave, so just the first part of the pentatonic scale. And we talked about loops and repeated patterns. And I said, okay, you're going to create a loop using these notes. And we talked, it needs to be short enough that you can remember it and repeat it. You can use one of the notes, you can use all the notes, figure out your loops. So I gave them some time to experiment. I let them share their loops. And then I think I had students, when they shared their loop, they'd teach the class. They'd be like, oh, yeah, it goes scale degree 1, 2, 3, 2, 1. And then we'd all practice it. And then I'd say, okay, how are we going to perform this? And someone raise their hand, be like, okay, I think all the trumpets should do it twice, forte. And then flutes are going to do it once, piano. And then we're going to do it once really fast all together. And I'd be like, okay, let's try it. And we'd write it on the board what we're going to do, and we'd try it. Like, any changes? And then I think I also had them get together in small groups. And I was like, okay, take your loops, figure out how you're going to perform them, just like the rhythm activity we did. Okay, in your small groups, how are you going to perform your loops? And my intention with that was we are going to have like something we could perform at our concert. We ran out of time, so we didn't do that. But I think that could work with any grade level. If it's general music, they could do found sounds or orff instruments, whatever they have access to. High schoolers can do 12-bar blues, whatever you want to set it up
Yeah,
for this is what you're using to create your loop. You could put a backing track on it, rhythmic or harmonic backing track could be really fun. And then just have them come up with ways they want to perform it and put it together and experiment and see what they like.
that's awesome. Yeah. And I think it's great that you're putting just enough parameters to make it safe, right?
Hmm.
Hmm.
But it's not too constricted where they're all going to end up with just the same exact thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's cool. Okay. I hope people are taking notes because that's like the perfect end of the school year kind of activity,
Yeah.
right? And it could probably take, I mean, I imagine you could spend 10 minutes on a version or an entire class period, right?
Hmm.
Depending on what you
Multiple
had.
class periods. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Oh, that's so fun. Cool. Okay. Well, if somebody tries it, your job is to reach out, let us all know. We want to hear how it goes. Very
Yeah.
cool.
And actually, speaking about that, could you let us know, like, how could people contact you if they want to let you know how that day went or just to learn more about your work?
Yeah, probably email is the best. What is a good email? Probably my ASU email, amaston@asu.edu. So you guys can put that in the description if that's
Yep.
easier. But
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah.
Should I put a link to your dissertation in the show notes too?
I mean, you can. No one has to read it. You can look at the pretty pictures of my quilt.
If
So
you want to see pictures of
I want to
Alisa's
see the
quilt.
quilt. Yeah. Yeah.
All
I'll click the
right.
link.
All right. We'll put that link in there. You'll get some good views.
yeah,
Nothing else.
yay, someone downloaded it on purpose.
Right. Awesome. Well, this has really been great. Lisa, I appreciate just how you were able to share things that are very practical for teachers. And I think that's important. But you also shared that, it's not always smooth sailing. Sometimes things are experiments and you have to try again, and that's okay.
Yeah.
So
I still feel very new to the student-centered creativity aspect of doing large ensemble. And I'm just like trying things and seeing what works and what doesn't and going from there. So
it sounds like your students are having fun.
yeah, I think so. Hopefully.
I think so too. All right, awesome. Well, again, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. If you have found value in our conversation, please hit that like button, subscribe to our podcast, and leave a review. Your feedback means the world to us and helps us grow our community of passionate music educators.